You can't change the past, but you can outwork it. What if I told you that the years you wasted, the opportunities you let slip away, the mornings you slept through, and the chances you were too afraid to take, none of that has to define what happens next? Somewhere right now, someone is sitting quietly, replaying their mistakes, wondering if it's too late to become who they were meant to be. Maybe that person is you. Maybe you look at your life and you see the gap between where you are and where you thought you'd be by now, and it feels heavy, like a weight you carry into every room you walk into. You think about the years you spent distracted, the goals you abandoned, the version of yourself you gave up on, and somewhere deep inside, a quiet voice keeps whispering, you had your chance and you wasted it. I want you to listen closely to what I'm about to say, because it might be the only sentence you need to hear today. You cannot change a single second of your past, not one, but you can outwork it. You can take everything you regret, everything you lost, every year you wasted, and you can turn it into fuel instead of a funeral. The past is not a prison unless you choose to keep living inside it. It is a lesson, and lessons are only wasted on people who refuse to apply them. So before we go any further, I want you to make a decision right here, right now, before you know how the rest of this journey unfolds. Decide that today is the day you stop mourning what you lost and start building what you still have time to create. Most people spend their entire lives negotiating with regret instead of confronting it. They tell themselves stories to soften the discomfort of where they are. They say things like, I'll start next year, or it's too late for someone my age, or other people had better circumstances than me. These are not facts. These are excuses dressed up as wisdom, and the tragedy is that people repeat them so often they eventually start believing them. The truth is far simpler and far more uncomfortable. Most people are not behind because life was unfair to them. Most people are behind because somewhere along the way they chose comfort over growth, distraction over discipline, and safety over the sacrifice that success demands. I am not saying this to hurt you. I am saying this because someone needs to say it plainly without sugarcoating it. Because sugar has never built a single successful life. The moment you stop blaming your past and start taking responsibility for your present, everything begins to shift. Responsibility is not a punishment. It is the doorway to power. As long as you believe your circumstances were caused by something outside of you, you remain powerless to change them. But the instant you accept that you and only you are responsible for what happens next, you take back control of your own life. Let's talk honestly about the past, because avoiding it does nothing but let it fester quietly in the background of your mind. Yes, you made mistakes. Yes, you wasted time you can never get back. Yes, there were seasons where you knew exactly what you should have been doing, and you did the opposite. This is not unique to you. Every person who has ever achieved something meaningful carries a private list of regrets. Moments they wish they could relive with more courage, more discipline, more clarity. The difference between those who eventually succeed and those who remain stuck is not the absence of regret. It is what they choose to do with it. Some people let regret paralyze them. They replay their failures on a loop until the loop becomes their identity. Others let regret sharpen them. They take the pain of wasted time and transform it into urgency. They stop asking, why did I waste so many years, and start asking, what can I do today that the old version of me refused to do? That single shift in the question you ask yourself can change the entire direction of your life. Here is something most people never fully understand until much later in life. Time lost cannot be recovered, but momentum lost can always be rebuilt. You are not behind because the clock moved forward without you. You are behind because you stopped moving while the clock kept ticking. The good news, if you can call it that, is that the clock does not care how long you've been standing still. It only cares whether you start moving now. Every single day that passes is a day you either build or waste, regardless of how many days you've already wasted before it. This means your past behavior, no matter how disappointing, has zero power over your future behavior unless you allow it to. The moment you decide to work harder than your past demanded of you, you begin closing the gap between where you are and where you should be. It won't happen overnight. It won't happen in a week, but it will happen because effort compounds the same way neglect compounds. The only difference is direction. I want you to imagine two people standing at the exact same starting point today. One of them has wasted the last 5 years. The other has used those 5 years wisely. If both of them decide, starting today, to work with the same intensity, The same discipline, the same relentless consistency. Who do you think closes the gap faster? The person who is comfortable and complacent because they already made progress, or the person who is desperate and hungry because they know exactly what it feels like to lose time? Desperation, when channeled correctly, is one of the most powerful forces a human being can possess. The person who has wasted years often has something the comfortable person lacks: urgency. And urgency, paired with discipline, produces results that casual effort never will. This is why so many people who started late end up surpassing those who had a head start. They are not running the same race at the same pace. They are running with the full knowledge of what it costs to fall behind, and that knowledge fuels an intensity that people who never fell behind rarely develop. But let's be honest about something else, because motivation without honesty is just noise. Outworking your past does not mean working yourself into exhaustion for a few emotional weeks and then quietly returning to your old habits. That is not outworking your past. That is performing urgency without practicing discipline, and performance always fades. Real transformation requires a completely different relationship with effort, one where you no longer wait to feel motivated before you act. Motivation is unreliable. It shows up when it wants to and disappears exactly when you need it most. Discipline does not ask how you feel. Discipline simply asks what needs to be done, and then it does it, regardless of mood, regardless of energy, regardless of circumstance. If you are serious about outworking your past, you have to stop waiting for inspiration to knock on your door. You have to build a version of yourself who works whether inspiration shows up or not. That is the version of you who actually changes their life. Everyone else is just talking about it. Think about the years you spent waiting for the right time to start the business, the right time to go back to school, the right time to fix your health, the right time to leave the situation that was draining you. I want you to understand something that most people never fully accept until it's almost too late. There is no right time. There is only the time you choose to start and the time you choose to keep delaying. Every excuse you've ever used to justify waiting was, underneath the surface, a form of fear wearing the mask of practicality. Fear is patient. It doesn't need to convince you today. It only needs you to say, "Not yet," one more time, and then another and another, until years have quietly slipped by without you noticing the years you lost were not stolen from you by circumstance. In most cases, they were spent by you willingly, on comfort, on distraction, on the illusion that tomorrow would somehow feel more ready than today. This is the part where I ask you to stop being gentle with yourself, not because you deserve cruelty, but because gentleness has clearly not produced the results you were hoping for. If soft self-talk and comfortable routines were enough to change your life, you would have already changed it. Something has to shift, and that something is your relationship with discomfort. Growth has never happened inside comfort zones. It happens in the uncomfortable space where you do the things your old self avoided. Waking up earlier than you want to, working when you're tired, saying no to things that feel good in the moment but cost you your future, showing up on the days when absolutely nothing in you wants to. That discomfort is not your enemy. It is the exact price of admission for the life you claim you want. Anyone who tells you that success comes without sacrifice is either lying to you or has never actually built anything meaningful themselves. Let's talk about what it actually looks like to outwork your past, because vague motivation is easy to say and hard to apply. Outworking your past starts with brutal honesty about where your time currently goes. Most people believe they don't have enough time, when in reality they have plenty of time, just poorly directed. Hours disappear into distractions that feel harmless in the moment. Endless scrolling, meaningless conversations, entertainment that numbs rather than nourishes. None of these things are evil on their own, but in excess they quietly rob you of the one resource you can never get back. If you want to outwork your past, the first step is reclaiming your hours. Look at your day honestly. Or identify where your time actually goes, not where you think it goes. Then start redirecting even small amounts of that time toward the goals that matter. You don't need 8 extra hours a day to change your life. You need 1 or 2 focused, intentional hours used consistently day after day without excuses. Consistency is where most people fail, not because they lack ability, but because they lack patience. We live in a world that has trained us to expect instant results. But real transformation, the kind that actually outworks decades of neglect, does not happen in days or weeks. It happens in months and years of unglamorous, repetitive effort that nobody claps for. Nobody sees the early mornings. Nobody sees the nights you chose discipline over rest. Nobody sees the meals you skipped ordering out, the shows you didn't watch, the invitations you turned down because you were building something instead. And that is exactly why so many people quit, because the sacrifice is real, but the reward is delayed, and human beings are wired to crave immediate gratification. If you can train yourself to keep showing up even when there is no applause, even when there is no proof yet that it's working, you will separate yourself from the majority of people who quit the moment results don't show up fast enough. I want to share something with you about the nature of compound effort, because understanding this concept can change how you see your entire timeline. Small actions repeated consistently do not produce small results. They produce results that grow exponentially over time in ways that are almost invisible in the early stages. This is why the first few weeks of any real change feel discouraging. You work hard and nothing seems to shift. Your body doesn't look different, your bank account doesn't look different, your skills don't feel dramatically improved. And in that discouragement, most people quit, convinced that their effort isn't working. But effort always works. It simply works on a timeline that requires patience most people never develop. The people who succeed are not the ones who worked harder for 2 weeks and gave up when nothing changed. They are the ones who kept working for 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, trusting that the compounding would eventually catch up to their effort, even when they couldn't see it yet. Now let's talk about fear, because fear is the invisible force behind almost every delayed dream. Fear rarely announces itself directly. It disguises itself as logic. It tells you to wait until you have more information, more money, more confidence, more certainty. It convinces you that waiting is wisdom, when in reality, waiting is often just fear wearing a more socially acceptable outfit. The people who eventually outwork their past are not the people who eliminated fear. Fear never fully disappears, no matter how experienced or successful you become. The people who outwork their past are the ones who learn to act despite fear, who stop waiting for the fear to go away before taking the next step. Courage was never the absence of fear. It was the decision to move forward while fear was still present, still loud, still trying to convince you to stay where it's safe. I want you to think about comfort for a moment, because comfort is one of the most dangerous forces working against you, precisely because it doesn't feel dangerous. Comfort feels good. It feels safe. It feels like relief. But comfort has a hidden cost that most people don't calculate until years later, when they look back and realize how much time they spent protecting a feeling instead of building a future. Growth and comfort cannot coexist in the same moment. Every time you choose comfort over growth, you are quietly voting for the same results tomorrow that you had today. And if you keep casting that vote long enough, one day you wake up and realize an entire decade passed while you were simply making yourself comfortable. This is not meant to scare you. It is meant to wake you up, because awareness is the first step toward change, and most people never even reach that first step. Let me tell you about the kind of person who actually outworks their past, because I want you to see clearly what this looks like in real life, not in some abstract poetic sense. This person wakes up understanding that today matters more than yesterday, because yesterday is finished and today is still being written. They do not spend their mornings scrolling through other people's highlight reels, comparing their behind-the-scenes struggle to someone else's polished success. They understand that comparison is a thief that steals motivation and replaces it with resentment. Instead, they focus entirely on their own timeline, their own pace, their own progress. They treat their goals like appointments they refuse to cancel, not suggestions they'll get to eventually. When they feel like quitting, and they will feel like quitting because everyone does, they remind themselves why they started, and then they take one more step anyway. Not because it's easy, but because ease was never the goal. Growth was the goal, and growth demands difficulty as its price. Think about the people you admire most, the ones whose lives seem to have transformed dramatically from where they began. I promise you, if you dig into their story honestly, you will find years of unseen struggle before the visible success. You will find failures they don't talk about often, rejections that would have crushed someone less determined, seasons where absolutely nothing seemed to be working. The difference between them and everyone else who faced similar struggles is simple. They kept working through the parts of the story that don't make good highlight reels. They showed up during the boring middle, the part where progress is slow and invisible and deeply unglamorous. Everyone wants the result. Very few people are willing to endure the process that actually produces it. If you want a life that looks different from your past, you have to become someone who is willing to endure what your past self was never willing to endure. I want to address something directly because I know it's sitting in the back of your mind, even if you haven't said it out loud. You might be thinking that your situation is different, that your circumstances were harder than most, that the years you lost were lost because of things genuinely outside your control. And I want to acknowledge that life is not equally fair to everyone. Some people start with real disadvantages, financial struggles, family situations, health challenges, circumstances they never chose. I am not here to dismiss that reality, but here is the deeper truth underneath it. Unfair circumstances explain why your starting point was harder. They do not explain why you stay in the same place for years after you became aware of what needed to change. At some point, awareness arrives for almost everyone. You realize what you need to do differently. What separates people after that moment of awareness is not their circumstances anymore. It's their willingness to act despite those circumstances. Some people use hardship as the reason they push harder. Others use it as the reason they give up. The hardship is the same. The response is the choice that actually determines the outcome. Let's talk about discipline in a way that goes deeper than the typical motivational cliche, because discipline is often misunderstood as some rigid, joyless grinding through life. Real discipline is not about punishing yourself. It is about respecting your future self enough to make decisions today that your future self will thank you for. When you choose to work out instead of staying in bed, you are not punishing your body. You are respecting the person you will become in a year. When you choose to study instead of scrolling mindlessly, you are not depriving yourself of fun. You are investing in the version of you who will have opportunities that your undisciplined self never would have earned. Every disciplined choice is really an act of self-respect disguised as sacrifice. Once you start seeing discipline this way, it stops feeling like punishment and starts feeling like the highest form of self-love available to you. The kind that doesn't just feel good in the moment, but actually changes your entire trajectory. I also want to talk about the danger of perfectionism, because so many people confuse it with high standards when, in reality, it often becomes an elegant excuse for inaction. Perfectionism whispers that you should wait until you have the perfect plan, the perfect conditions, the perfect amount of confidence before you begin. But perfection is a moving target that conveniently never arrives, which means people who wait for it often wait forever. The people who actually outwork their past are not perfect. They are consistent despite being imperfect. They start messy. They make mistakes publicly. They fail in ways that would embarrass someone more concerned with appearing put together than with actually making progress. If you are waiting to feel ready before you start rebuilding your life, I need you to hear this clearly. Readiness is not a feeling that arrives before action. Readiness is a feeling that is built through action. You do not think your way into confidence. You act your way into it, one imperfect step at a time. Let's talk about identity, because this might be the most important part of everything I'm about to say. Most people try to change their results without ever changing their identity, and that is precisely why the change doesn't last. If you see yourself as someone who is lazy, someone who always quits, someone who is simply not disciplined, then even when you manage to push through a few good days, your old identity eventually pulls you back to familiar behavior. Real transformation requires you to consciously choose a new identity before the results even show up. You have to start telling yourself, I am someone who follows through, even before you've fully proven it to yourself. You have to start acting like the disciplined version of you exists right now, not someday in the future once you've earned it. Every action you take is a vote for the identity you're building. Every time you show up when it's hard, you cast a vote for I am someone who doesn't quit. Every time you choose growth over comfort, you cast a vote for I am someone who takes their future seriously. Eventually, if you cast enough of these votes, the new identity becomes undeniable, not just to others, but to yourself. I want you to think honestly about what your daily habits are currently voting for. Are your mornings voting for growth or for avoidance? Is your evening routine voting for discipline or for numbness? Is the way you spend your free time voting for the future you claim you want or for the comfortable stagnation you claim you're trying to escape? Most people never examine this honestly, which is exactly why their results never change. They want a different outcome while repeating the exact same inputs that produced their current situation. If you want a different life, at some point you have to accept that different inputs are required, and different inputs almost always feel uncomfortable at first because your mind is wired to resist change, even change that's good for you. Now let's talk about real life patterns, because abstract philosophy only goes so far without grounding it in something tangible. Think about someone who spent their 20s without direction, drifting from job to job, never fully committing to anything long enough to master it. By the time they reach their 30s, they look around and see peers who seem years ahead, established careers, financial stability, clear direction. It would be easy for this person to conclude that they've permanently fallen behind, that the gap is too large to close. But here's what actually happens to the ones who refuse to accept that conclusion. They start treating their 30s the way most people treat their 20s, as a decade of intense learning, skill building, and risk-taking. Except now with more self-awareness and urgency than they had before. Within a few years of relentless, focused effort, they often surpass people who had a head start, but coasted on autopilot the entire time. A head start means nothing if it's followed by years of stagnation. A late start means nothing if it's followed by years of relentless intensity. Or think about someone whose health declined over years of neglect. Poor habits repeated so long they became identity rather than behavior. It would be easy for this person to believe the damage is permanent, that too many years of neglect can never be undone. But the human body, much like the human mind, responds remarkably well to consistent effort, even after years of damage. It doesn't erase the past neglect, but it builds a stronger present that eventually overshadows it. The years of neglect become a distant memory, not because they were erased, but because they were outworked by years of consistent care that followed. This is the pattern across every area of life: finances, relationships, skills, confidence. The years lost are never recovered directly. They are overshadowed by the intensity and consistency of what comes after them. I want to gently challenge something you might be telling yourself, especially if you spent years feeling behind. You might believe that because you started late, your journey has to look exactly like everyone else's, just delayed. This is not true, and clinging to that belief will exhaust you unnecessarily. Your journey does not need to follow someone else's timeline. It needs to follow your own pace, built on your own priorities, informed by your own lessons. Comparing your chapter 3 to someone else's chapter 10 will only produce discouragement, not motivation. The goal was never to catch up to someone else's life. The goal is to build a life that reflects your own values, your own definition of success, at whatever pace your circumstances actually allow. Outworking your past does not mean sprinting recklessly to catch an arbitrary finish line someone else set. It means committing to consistent, intentional effort that compounds over time, regardless of how it compares to anyone else's timeline. Let's address something practical, because motivation without strategy tends to fade quickly. If you're serious about outworking your past starting today, you need clarity on exactly what that looks like in your specific life. Sit down and be brutally honest about where the neglect has been the deepest. Is it your health? Is it your finances? Is it your relationships? Is it your skills and career? Most people try to fix everything at once, which usually results in fixing nothing at all. Pick the one area where change would create the most meaningful ripple effect across the rest of your life, and focus your intensity there first. Build one habit that represents real discipline in that area, and repeat it daily until it no longer requires willpower to maintain. Once that habit becomes automatic, add another. This is how real transformation actually happens, not through dramatic, unsustainable overhauls, but through the patient stacking of disciplined habits, one on top of another, until your entire life looks different from where it started. I also want to talk about the emotional weight of shame, because many people carry shame about their past instead of simply learning from it. And shame is one of the heaviest things a person can carry while trying to move forward. Shame convinces you that you are fundamentally flawed because of what you did or didn't do. Regret says, I made a mistake. Shame says, I am the mistake. This distinction matters enormously because regret can be transformed into motivation, but shame tends to paralyze. If you want to outwork your past, you have to separate your identity from your history. Your history is something that happened. It is not who you are. Who you are is being decided right now, today, through the choices you make moving forward. The moment you stop identifying with your worst years and start identifying with your next disciplined action, shame begins to lose its grip on you. I want you to consider something about legacy, because sometimes the motivation to outwork your past isn't just about you. It's about everyone watching you, even if you don't realize they're watching. Somebody in your life is paying attention to how you handle setbacks, how you respond to years that didn't go the way you planned. Maybe it's a younger sibling, a child, a friend who's struggling with the same doubts you once had. When you choose to outwork your past instead of surrendering to it, you are not just changing your own life, you are proving to everyone watching that it is possible, that circumstances do not have to be permanent, that late starts do not have to mean permanent losses. This kind of example is far more powerful than any speech you could ever give someone. People don't remember what you told them to do, they remember what you actually did when things were difficult. Let's talk about the moments when you'll want to quit because they are coming, and pretending otherwise would be dishonest. There will be days when the gap between where you are and where you want to be feels unbearable. There will be moments when you compare your current effort to your current results and feel like nothing is working. In those moments, you have two choices. You can interpret the difficulty as proof that you should stop, or you can interpret it as proof that you're doing something that actually matters. Anything easy rarely produces meaningful transformation. If outworking your past felt effortless, everyone would do it, and it wouldn't set you apart from anyone else. The difficulty is not a sign that you're on the wrong path. It is often a sign that you're exactly on the path that leads somewhere worth going. I want to leave you with something to hold on to during those difficult moments, something to return to whenever doubt creeps back in. The years you lost are gone, and no amount of regret will bring them back. But the years ahead of you are still unwritten, still full of possibility, still waiting for the version of you who finally decided to stop apologizing for the past and start building relentlessly toward the future. You do not need to erase what happened. You only need to outwork it. Every early morning you choose discipline over comfort is a step toward closing that gap. Every skill you build, every relationship you repair, every habit you replace with something stronger is proof that your past does not get the final say in your story. It only got the opening chapters. Everything after this moment belongs entirely to you. So here's what I want you to do, starting today. Not tomorrow, not next Monday, not after you feel ready. Today. Choose one thing, one single discipline that represents the person you're trying to become, and commit to doing it every single day, regardless of motivation, regardless of mood, regardless of how far behind you feel. Let that one action be your proof to yourself that you are no longer the person who waits. You are becoming the person who works. Let every difficult day remind you why you started. Let every small win remind you that consistency, not perfection, is what actually changes a life. And when you feel the weight of your past trying to convince you that it's too late, that the gap is too wide, that other people had it easier, remember this: you cannot change a single day of what already happened. But you can decide right now, in this exact moment, to work harder than your past ever demanded of you. That decision, repeated daily, is how ordinary people build extraordinary lives. Not through some dramatic overnight transformation, but through the quiet, consistent refusal to let yesterday determine what tomorrow becomes. Your past wrote the beginning of your story, but you, and only you, hold the pen for everything that comes next. So pick it up and start writing the chapter that outworks everything that came before it.